So we are launching the second webinar on 360 competence assessment of trainers in a training field. And last time, a month ago, we had 2 speakers, and we shared also the blog post about and the recording of the outcomes from the last webinar. And we're really eager to explore further on how 360 assessment is used in training context by different organizations, institutions, trainers, and so on. And I'm glad to have again 2 contributors, 2 speakers for the second webinar. We have Mara Georgescu and Julia Stankiewicz, who join our webinar today, and we have also Agne Rapalaite from the Visual Mind, who is drawing and visualizing what people are talking about. If you click on the Zoom window on the bottom line chat, you can send some chat messages to people, either to all of us or to some people privately. This is a space actually where you can also ask questions while the speaker is talking, so then we can address the question. And we also posted a link in the chat to the meeting notes, webinar notes. So this is also something where you can, comment or add things. And I have a few colleagues from the International Youth Work Trainers Guild who are helping me with the notes. And we have more people from the guild joining because the webinar is happening within the framework of strategic partnership project, international strategic partnership project on trainers appraisal. It's an initiative where we're developing an online platform for trainers' professional development. So by now we have 12 people already, and without further ado, then I ask Mara actually to introduce yourself and also the whole context from which you will talk about the use of 360-degree assessment.
Yes, hello Laimonas, and hello everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So my name is Mara Georgescu. I currently work at the partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Commission in the youth field. But I'm going to talk about an experience today from 2016 in the context of the Council of Europe Youth Department's training of trainers active in the youth field, and particularly this long-term training course called TRACE, where we actually used 361 degrees, which is a bit of a contradictory geometrical issue, but for the context of this long-term training course for trainers, it made sense. I don't know if you want me to say more about it now or a bit later.
I think as it makes sense for you, Mara. I mean, now we're planning around 15 minutes then for your part, plus time for questions. So. Okay.
Well, I was, maybe just to say who I was in the process, and because Julia was also involved, so just to also define a bit who we are. So I was working on this project, well, in other contexts, you would say like a project manager and trainer. Here it's called educational advisor. Julia was one of the participants. And in this long-term training course for trainers, well, the basic aim of the training was to actually prepare a bit a group of 30 young trainers to also be able to upgrade a bit their competencies as trainers at international level in the context of the Council of Europe, on the basis of the values the organization stands for, and so on. The format the training had was a long-term training course, so it had 2 residential seminars, quite long actually. Each one of them were about 8-9 days, if I remember well. And then in between, there was a practice phase, and there were the so-called support measures. So while the seminars were very much about developing competencies, developing also a capacity to reflect on yourself as a trainer, and really also getting also the skills in, In between, participants had to run a practice, so a training practice as trainers. They also had to develop a product, which could be an article, a game, a new system of self-assessment, whatever. So something else than a training. And they were also mentored by a team of trainers. This, to make it very brief, we had a competence framework for trainers. And so where does 361 come in? It was that together with Jonathan Boyer from the UK, with his company View from Here, we wanted to use a bit the basis of 360, which is this system for assessment with the perspectives of different people in, and add this +1, which was basically a debriefing of 360 through the mentoring process. So that's why the 1 degree was added in there. The whole 360 was developed on the basis of the competence framework. And we asked participants to first self-assess, so their own view. And then they had to identify people such as managers or commissioners, colleagues or co-trainers, and also their own participants in their training courses, and ideally from the practice training course from TRACE. And with this, and in this case, I don't know if this is interesting, but probably yes, because it was also something that we reflected upon afterwards. We had about 39 scored questions, so it was not very short. One could argue that perhaps for somebody who is training young people and asks a young person to rate that, it's probably too much. So there were open questions, but most of the questions were really to rate the behavior of the trainer. I can also give you an example of how questions look like. I can have a few here. Yes, for example, how much did the specific trainer show respect for diversity and treat everyone with dignity and respect in a training context? Or to what extent did the trainer make use of suitable ways of documenting educational processes? And then you have a rating system. So all this was done online. So participants, their own participants, etc., co-trainers could answer online. And what was useful for the 1 degree was that through the system that Jonathan put in place for us, we could get some charts and see a bit the tendencies of the different people answering. And with that, we could have also a debriefing session in the mentoring, because in the context of TRACE, which was a long-term training course, the aim of 361 was mostly to also, well, on the one hand, have this view on self-awareness, learning more about oneself as a trainer, but also to look at where can I develop more. And that's also where the 1 degree, so the discussion each one of the participants had with their mentor, was supposed to go through. So to go in the direction of what do you want to do next? Where do you want to focus more? What other kind of training you may need, or what else would you like to learn? The process was quite complex, I must say. I mean, even from my perspective, Julia will definitely tell us more about her perspective on that. But it was quite complex because, first of all, we as trainers in TRACE had to do it on ourselves. So we were like the guinea pigs for this system. And Jonathan was kind of our mentor for all of us, so that we could also see how the mentoring discussion could be organized. And then for each one of the participants, it was quite complex to find people that want to answer such a complex survey, to find people that could answer in English. So let's say that language and culture were 2 of the things that the survey probably is limited in. And what I mean by that is, 1, the terminology is was very similar to the competence framework. And it's one thing to understand it as a participant in a long-term training course, what respect for everyone, dignity means. Yeah, like I gave the example. But maybe if you're not in this world that has its own terminology, it might be a bit difficult to actually understand the whole thing. And culture, because people sometimes also said it's a bit tricky, because in our country we always tend to see ourselves as less than what we are worth. And if you give yourself a higher grade, in a sense, it's almost like a grading system. So it's the grade, then it's seen as weird. so that was one of the things we had to navigate through.
And how about also another cultural trait, which is like, can you criticize someone?
As well, exactly. So this kind of things were perhaps a bit difficult to deal with. Then, of course, all the technicalities, which are more, I mean, okay, the platform, the fact that the language was only English, and so on. And then, of course, the whole question about who am I to judge? I mean, in the sense of, do we have the same reference system if we work with the person one time, if we saw a trainer in 2-day experience, or if we've known the person for 20 years, and so on. So there are also these more philosophical questions around, assessing competence out of a given behavior that in some cases it was difficult. In any case, the one degree focused mostly on some of the tendencies. So we didn't get stuck in, oh, there is one person that really rated you badly all over the thing. So, well, what can we do about it? But rather seeing there are some tendencies that came through. What was also quite useful, at least from my experience, now I'm talking as a mentor, it was like, there were also some word clouds that the system Jonathan developed for Trace could offer us, and you could see, what were the strengths of the people. And in some cases, it made sense for them quite a lot. It was also interesting that they could see it echoed by their colleagues or their managers or their participants, and then they could say, okay, then I really want to work on this. I already wanted to work on this, but I wasn't sure. So now giving them a few more hints where they want to go. For the Trace experience overall, I mean, we have also a report, which I'm not really sure whether it's public or not, so I will try to see if that can be shared. But overall, it was at least an exploratory venture, which proved to be quite relevant in a sense, in the context of a training course where you're not there to use 360 to assess, but rather to use it as a learning tool to set up learning goals, to see where you want to go as a young professional, and so on. So that was quite positive, I would say. And again, I mean, I think we were the first ones to use something called 361, which made everyone very curious and very puzzled. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, this is it. I think there is a question.
Yeah, there is a question that is asking, you mentioned there was this aspect of rating. So how did trainers perceived rating, and was it enough or was it limiting? I'm not sure if Nereus asked how the trainers perceived as receivers or the ones who had to do the rating. So maybe you can also...
Yeah. From what I remember, it was quite mixed, because you have such answers such as, how effectively did the trainer facilitate cooperation between participants, which is a basic thing of non-formal education, right? And then you have very effectively down to not effectively at all, or not observed. I think this not observed is also fair enough to have it, because perhaps some of the things you really didn't observe in your colleague or in your trainer or in your co-worker. So yeah. I think in a sense it's really based on perception of the people. So how people rated varied a lot, and as I said, language and culture and understanding of the terminology was something. How participants received it on their end, some, as far as I know, were a little bit stressed and resistant. Others were quite excited. So I don't think there was just one answer to this question in the group. Nevertheless, and I think this is something to reflect upon as a field as well, people, and I include myself in the people, because I was also like, oh my God, now I'm going to know how many different people look at me. I think we're still geared somehow to see assessment as kind of from a negative perspective, showing what you don't have or what you are not. And on the contrary, in some of the cases where we had participants that rated themselves super low, they received quite positive, let's say, perception from others. So it's also this kind of, yes, resistance because of fear of whatever. Probably this comes also from school to a certain extent. And then also seeing, wow, people observe certain strengths that I didn't observe, or maybe I have a weakness there that I need to work on, or something that I need to learn from to improve myself. So we try to gear it all the time towards this. We do this for learning and improving and developing. But of course, the first reaction would almost naturally be assessment. What is this about? I mean, who's going to assess me? And of course, as the course was also organized by the Council of Europe, who in the long run would also like these young professional trainers to be the trainers the Council of Europe uses, even the more pressure was there. I don't know if we solved it anyway, even though the assessments were confidential to participants and to their mentors. So I do not have a copy of every single person in the group, for example.
Yeah. We have a question, Mara. We have Marcus asking, when developing and designing the 360 or 361 process, was it done kind of from scratch, and you designed the whole process of questions and who gives feedback to whom and so on? Or did you take already some kind of existing model and just put your list of competences on top of that? And
the model,
and then also there's a question, kind of what were the lessons learned from the other fields, if you were looking at how other fields are implementing 360?
There was already this model of 360, which is being used in business, for example, in human resources field, in different companies and so on. The Council of Europe also uses that for their human resources. So, for example, in the Council of Europe, managers or people can ask to do a 360 for their own competence development. And Jonathan actually had this system in place already. So we basically use this skeleton, if I can say so, or this infrastructure to adapt it to the training context, and then to adapt it also to the competence framework of TRACE. We specifically asked to also have this word clouds and also more open questions, because that also helps, I mean, beyond ratings and grids and stuff like that, also to have a bit more discursive or narrative opportunities to get these different visions. But the basis of the whole 360 one is the 360 system, and the +1 had to be developed a bit specifically for us in the context of this long-term training course, so as to also integrate a bit better the different support measures to learning. Because, as I said, participants were doing a practice from which they learn, but in that practice project, which is a training most of the times, they also have participants. So why not use that also as a basis for 360 in the cases where, you know, it fitted also the timeline. The mentoring discussion and the grid for that was developed for us and tested on us first. So that's kind of, maybe it's more specific than the 360 as such. And I think that was quite interesting and valuable to use, because in a way, when you're on your own and you receive this 360 and you don't have a debriefing moment to also learn from it, you can take it in many different ways. It's very relative. I mean, what does it mean? I'm overrating myself or underrating. What can it mean? So also having a discussion on that was quite interesting, I would say, and specific to this context.
Yeah. Now looking back at this experience, already you can look with certain time perspective in a way. You as a person back then representing an institution which was kind of organizer of the whole training, what were your key lessons learned from that? Would it be something that you would repeat again? And if yes, what changes would you make?
I think there were some specific recommendations. I mean, already starting from language, we just cannot assume all the trainers work in English, and we should not assume. I mean, they can also work in a francophone or a russophone context. So at least, not to speak about all the other languages on Earth. So I think this the technical adaptation could be quite relevant, I would say.
In what sense, technical adaptation?
Perhaps having people answer in different languages if they wish so, but that's a work. It's quite intensive. Also, perhaps having some kind of a minimal insurance that people would actually understand some of the terminology we use, because we can't assume that they do. I mean, perhaps when we run training courses as trainers, we don't necessarily spend 2 days to explain to participants what non-formal education is about conceptually, theoretically. We do it. Yeah, we do it. We are ready to also say why we do it, but we don't spend time on the concepts, on the theory, and fair enough. I mean, otherwise we would not get anywhere anymore. But so things that we see as super important, such as, enhancing cooperation among your participants, you don't explain why this is so important, right? So when you ask people to assess, did she do it well? Yeah. Did she show this kind of behavior? What do you take as a rating, let's say, standard? So what do you have as your as your standard, basically, as your threshold? So there are some things where I think technically and also conceptually this could perhaps be a bit more improved. Also, as not to put people in the situation where they answer without really having any clue what they're doing. And I would also think it's probably important to communicate very well about it, so that people don't feel like they have to answer something where they need to praise the person or criticize the person, because that's really not what this is about. So in general, personally, I found it quite a useful tool. I think there are some technical and conceptual things to apply. And of course, I mean, if we speak also about infrastructure and so on, the tool we used was part of Jonathan's work. So he had developed this infrastructure. We don't have it. I don't know how much this would cost, to develop your own self-assessment tool, to make it also, fit into what I was saying before, different languages and so on. So one would need to really invest in it quite a lot. But I think as a learning possibility for people also to gain more self-awareness and maybe to identify where they want to go next, it's quite interesting, with the 1 degree, which I find quite important as well.
So adding actually a support and making sense of 360 results. Yeah.
Definitely.
And
definitely.
I think last webinar we also had Darko Markovic telling that basically through coaching sessions, they would use results of 360 to help people make sense of the results. Exactly. And make a proper use, but also see, what do I do now with what I've got, and how do I interpret, and how does it help my professional development?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Mara, for sharing. Now you can also kind of lean back and take a look at the whole picture that Agne just visualized. So also for others who just joined a bit later, you can take a look at the kind of snapshots and a map of different ideas that Mara was telling through. Also, if you are less visual and maybe more text, you can go to our Etherpad where we have notes, and thanks a lot for the colleagues taking notes. We have already plenty of things written there. So also, Mara, later, if you will see maybe there's something to edit or a few things to add, feel free to to add things there. Good. I don't see any more questions at that moment, so then I
Can I
welcome.
just
Yes,
think?
please.
If I mean, I think the at the end of the day, it's also a matter of our field becoming a bit more professional in a sense and serious, and people also gaining a bit more confidence to say what they actually are good at. So I think 360 helped at least some of the participants also gain this language of how do I talk about what I do. It's not like, you know, something happens before and in between there's some magic, but there are things we need to master in a sense, so that what we do with our participants in the training course actually works with that magic. So I'm a big fan of 361, as you probably understood by now, with some of the limitations that it has, of course, but it's also the field becoming more, in a way, strong at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So thanks for that opportunity to share this experience.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing. Really, it was very interesting to hear. And actually, you know, further on when we are developing, and because you said it's probably a complicated thing to develop, so we took the challenge actually to develop more than just 360 degree platform, but 360 will be one part of it. It will also have other things like professional development pathway and profiles, and also recognition of assessment through open badges and so on. So we are on this pathway, and that's why we are very interested to hear experiences also from different sides, you know, like from organizers and so on. And we will need, I think, some people, and we will need organizations and institutions who work with trainers to be on board with us, especially when we will continue development and when we want to test product. So, you know, to see if it works well, if it's relevant, if it's easy enough, and if it's addressing some of the issues that you pointed out, like, you know, how to not make it over complex, or how to deal with the language questions and so on. I think these are very, very interesting insights so far.